Gorden.
Hi there, I am Miriam Gorden. I'm the Reuse Program Director at the Story of Stuff, which is a national environmental organization, and we focus on how we produce, consume, and dispose of all the stuff in our lives. And many of you may be familiar with, we did one of the first animated short videos that helps drive consumer and political engagement in taking action to change this production, consumption, disposal model that we have. And for me personally, my background is I have spent, well over 3 decades, getting close to 4 decades of my life, focusing on protecting communities and individuals and the environment from exposure to toxic chemicals, and focusing also on the reduction of waste. And then I've done that both as a community organizer and a nonprofit organization leader. And I've worked for local, state, and federal government agencies on developing pollution prevention programs. And I would say in the last 20 years, I am based in the San Francisco Bay Area. In the last 20 years, I have focused on how to reduce our dependency on single-use disposable products with a strong focus on plastic pollution. And my work has been primarily in California, but increasingly national in scope, on helping communities to implement policies and programs that reduce single-use plastics and elevate reuse as a solution. And I am expanding our work on both at the Story of Stuff. Our work is focusing now on bringing reuse into the beverage industry and into the food service industry. And so I am here in Oregon in part because we are introducing legislation that would have the beverage industry expand the refillable beverage program operated by your recycling operator, OBRC, which is now available for some, offered by some craft breweries. And our goal is to make that refillable, returnable beverage bottle model something that all beverage producers offer to consumers. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Julianah Douglas. I'm the Climate Action Plan Manager at the City of Salem. I've been in municipal sustainability for about the last decade, and here at the city for the last a little over a year. And the city created the Climate Action Plan, a document involving a 41-member task force with a lot of your fellow residents and business leaders. And in that Climate Action Plan, they created 183 strategies to address the emissions. And so my job is working on implementing those strategies and helping us meet our emission reductions goals. So thank you so much for having me.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Mike Ewall, the founder and executive director of Energy Justice Network. Is this too loud? Should I back off? How's it sound? Good? Okay. So I got involved when I was in high school in 1990. They tried to build a trash incinerator in my hometown. Ultimately, it was kicked out, but built a few towns away, and not as big and dirty as they wanted, but it's now the largest air polluter in that county right outside of Philadelphia, where I grew up. And I now live in Philadelphia, surrounded by the worst cluster of trash incinerators in the nation. There are 5 of them. So whatever way the wind is blowing, they're surrounding the city, so I'm breathing so much trash no matter where the wind is going. A lot of it's our own. And that is very closely connected to the fact that Philadelphia is one of the worst cities in terms of asthma and cancer in the country. Those 5 incinerators are all among the top 7 industrial air polluters in the 7-county area. So it's not like we're talking about insignificant facilities. And we have oil refineries, chemical plants, power plants surrounding it, and incinerators rise to the top and are among the top polluters in not just there, but in lots of places around the country where we've looked at this. So I formed Energy Justice Network in 1999 to help people fight back against industries that bigger environmental groups were often saying are a good idea. At the time, that was natural gas power plants and also biomass incinerators, trash incinerators. And so we have a network that includes amazing groups that are members like Beyond Toxics, like Clean Air Now Coalition, and VNEX. I'm going to butcher their name if I try to get their acronym right, but fighting the Coffin Butte landfill. And we've been just supporting groups around the country to win battles against dirty energy and waste facilities, especially waste incinerators, because we've known and documented how they're the most expensive and polluting way to manage waste or to make energy. But just a few other things by way of introducing myself. We've had a lot of victories across the country. This is one of 2 major victories this year that we've been involved in. Another one just came this past few days in New York, where they're trying to build a dredge burning facility in Rensselaer, and a local law that I drafted that's not even passed yet. They're going to pass it probably on Tuesday. Scared the company enough that they're like, forget it, we're giving up. So we like to bring those kinds of strategies to communities to help win against all kinds of things that are dangerous, that don't need to exist, and that we need better alternatives for. And so as far as alternatives, and we'll probably talk about this later, where we need to go is called zero waste. And there's a zero waste hierarchy that I developed that's now used as an international standard. And I work with the Zero Waste International Alliance to help develop and refine what zero waste means internationally. And we just built a lot of other tools in terms of we're doing a lot of environmental justice mapping. We have ejmap.org as a site. If you want to look up where are dangerous things for energy and waste in your area, you can find them and interact and say, oh, there's this new thing that we should add to your map. Tools like that. And just also consulting with local governments, with local community groups, and helping make sure that we transition away from all sorts of dirty energy and waste facilities to clean energy and zero waste systems. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Mike.
Thanks, Mike. Good afternoon. My name's Mark Yeager, and I am here representing the Valley Neighbors for Environmental Quality and Safety, which is a community activist group that is working to stop the expansion of the Coffin Butte landfill, which is just north of Corvallis. My background is primarily municipal engineering and water quality based, so drinking water, wastewater, stormwater, those sorts of things. But I have had some training in solid waste, and I've been a community volunteer on the Solid Waste Advisory Council for Benton County, where the Coffin Butte landfill lies. And our group was organized with the onset of the most recent, I should say the previous expansion request by the owner and operator of the Coffin Butte landfill. That was in 2021. So our community activist group is working to get that landfill expansion stopped so we can move and have a paradigm shift in how we approach waste management, similar to what Mike is talking about in terms of a zero waste approach. So thanks very much for coming out. Appreciate your interest today.
Thank you, Mark. And I'll just take one more moment to mention a little bit more about who Beyond Toxics is. The organization I direct. Beyond Toxics is a statewide environmental justice organization, and we work for meaningful participation and involvement of grassroots leadership from all of Oregon's pollution-burdened communities. Our objective is to uplift the knowledge and lived experiences of Oregonians who are disproportionately impacted by pollution and climate change. And so to achieve that, we focus on eliminating the root causes of pollution and environmental destruction. And in many cases, this means starting by working in community and taking those community concerns up to the level of state policy reform. So, we're excited to work with all of the groups represented here today. I'm going to start our discussion with a question for Mike Ewall. Mike, you've had serious concerns about the incinerator here at the formerly Gorden incinerator for a long time, which led you and Environmental Justice Network to support Senate Bill 488. You gave a lot of input into that bill, and that bill required continuous monitoring and sampling of toxic emissions from the incinerator. Tell us what inspired you to lend your expertise to those of us here in Oregon to help pass Senate Bill 488, and how that went for you. How difficult was it to pass, and what has happened since the bill's passage, and whether you think the bill contributed to ReWorld's decision to cease operations?
I think there were like 6 questions in there, so you're going to have to remind me of some of those when I fail to hit them all. So, first of all, it's my personal and organizational mission to get all waste incinerators in this country closed. There were about close to 200 of them when I first got involved in 1991, and now there are 62 that will be left trash burning commercial plants in the U.S. By the end of this year. Once this one closes, there will be the 4th one to close just this year. And what else to say? God, I'm trying to remember all your questions, Lisa. Tell it like it is. Okay, so ordinances, let's get there. I'll go there. One of the strategies that I've been bringing to this work is to use local ordinances to stop polluters. This is the first time this strategy has really jumped to the state level, but since the mid-90s, actually, I've been using local ordinances to go after polluters because that's where the people power is, it's strongest at the local level. And what is often difficult to figure out for a community is, well, how can we beat this company when the system tells you, go to this state environmental agency hearing, speak up, get ignored, have a permit issued, have a bunch of bake sales to raise money for lawyers and other experts to fight those permits. And then usually you lose because the bottom drops out of your group once you have experts involved. And I love the fact that I can wear a lawyer hat when I say this now. Back in 1994, I was at a conference and there was a workshop about how to win without lawyers, taught by a lawyer. And I thought it was brilliant. And so I've been preaching it ever since. And now that I am one, I can do the same thing. But the idea is when lawyers get involved, people watch too much TV and they think that lawyers fire silver bullets and can kill anything, and they hear about these ideas like, what about class actions? Let's do that. I'm like, okay, that's not going to work here, but okay, it sounds good. But the reality is so many groups that get into these kinds of fights against facilities follow what the system tells them to do. And when you do that, it generally loses because the system is designed for companies to allow these things to be legal and for you not to win. And so that's why it's necessary for us to figure out how not to fight money power with money power, fight them expert for expert and lawyer for lawyer, but to fight money power with people power, and to find strategic ways to use the law so that it's a people-powered approach. And that's what we've been doing with local ordinances, where in Pennsylvania we stopped a multi-state nuclear waste dump from being built, in part because I got a dozen counties to pass a local ordinance that cranked up the standards on them, and they didn't like that. And I wasn't even a lawyer at the time. I was in undergrad, and I just found someone else's copy. I'm like, all right, let's tighten up some things here, and you don't have to be a lawyer to do this, but it helps. And you can use people power to get things like that passed. And so since then, I learned how to do local clean air laws in Pennsylvania, and we stopped a crematory first with it. We were going to use it against a bigger coal operation, but the first town that was ready to do it, they're like, help us stop this crematory in a residential neighborhood. Okay, great. So we stopped them. Then, because it was a crematory, another place found out about it that was fighting the same thing. So we ended up ultimately stopping 3 crematories with that strategy. And then eventually stopped a trash and sewage sludge incinerator with that kind of strategy. We stopped a hazardous waste incinerator planned by the mafia kingpin of Northeast Pennsylvania with that same strategy. Then I learned, once I finally got to law school, this was in 2008, they were giving away free law school for activist scholarships to University of DC. And so I went there and I learned how to figure out how to do this in other states. And I mapped out for all the states which states allow their local governments to be stricter than state or federal law in terms of air or waste laws. Unfortunately, Oregon is not a good one on this, but a lot of states are. And so I've been using that strategy, and I managed to do stuff in New York and in Maryland and beat up polluters at the local level where people can go to City Hall and say, pass this, and not have to try to change the whole state law. But kind of fast forwarding, because the amazing organizing work from Lisa and her connections and other people who were involved in this. I mean, I wasn't even on the ground here. It was almost all Lisa and Carol. I don't know if I'm allowed to call him out, but hi. I can see you blurry somewhere there. Put on my glasses. So, like the three of us were in all these frantic little calls with Senator Patterson or her staff, and like, all right, we're going to amend this bill for a sixth time. What are we going to do with it? And it started off as a totally different bill. But we turned it into the kind of bill I've been doing in other places. And those bills largely work like this. They say, first of all, we're going to make you continuously monitor for a lot more than you have to monitor right now. Because right now, anything with a smokestack has to continuously monitor about 3 pollutants. None of the toxic ones. It's carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxides that trigger asthma attacks, and sulfur dioxide. And that's it. The most toxic chemicals known to science, dioxin interference, once a year, but actually it's worse than that. Usually it's 1 burner per year. So if you have 2 burners, it'll be once every 2 years. The most toxic stuff known to science gets sampled. Yet there are studies from Europe showing that when you use continuous sampling technology, the actual levels of these toxic chemicals that are like measured in picograms and that can hurt you, there's no safe dose of it, are 30 to 1,300 times worse than we've been told for, in this case, 38 years of them testing once a year under best behavior. And so the analogy I often make about this is if we let people drive around and regulate speeding the way we regulate most chemicals at smokestacks in this country, we would let people drive around all year with no speedometer in their car. And once a year on the highway, there will be a speed trap set, and there will be signs saying, warning, slow down, speed trap ahead. And the brother of the driver will be running the speed trap because the companies hire their own consultants to do the testing. That's literally how almost every chemical that is tested at this incinerator and anything else with a smokestack is actually regulated, which is completely appalling. When I looked at the biggest incinerator in the country, the one of the 5 near me is in Chester, Pennsylvania. I'm downwind of that one. And they burn 3,500 tons per day, so they're 7 times bigger than what you have here. And they're missing half of the pollution control devices that most incinerators have. But they use continuous monitors for hydrochloric acid. And so I looked at that. It's the only one in the country I can find that has data for both sets. So I'm like, what is the continuous stuff telling us versus what you have here, the once a year test? And it came out 62% higher in reality than what everyone else in the country thinks is coming out. So we've been lied to for decades in terms of how much toxic stuff we're breathing, drinking, eating. When it comes to dioxin, it's usually eating. If you're not vegan, sorry to break it to you, but 93% of your dioxin exposure comes not from breathing the air. It comes from hamburgers and basically like anything that's meat or dairy, because these chemicals climb up the food chain very rapidly. And that's actually, learning this years ago is what made me go from vegetarian to vegan, because I'm like, that's how I'm getting my dioxin, from cheese and milk? God. So it's a real wake-up call when you realize that the levels are far higher than we knew. It's contaminating our food supply. It's contaminating babies. It's contaminating a lot more than moss, which was in the recent study. It's contaminating our bodies. And they're lying to us about how much is coming out. So that's why it was so necessary to get this bill passed. And it was definitely the example of, like, they talk about legislation as sausage making. Well, we started with a totally different bill, and then we literally had 6 amendments to it, and some of them we couldn't get changes made the right way in time, so it didn't come out exactly like we wanted, but it still had the effect of shutting this plant down. And I know this not because of what they told the news media, because they've been very careful not to tell reporters why they're closing. But what they did in the past couple years that we've been battling this out and meeting with the state environmental agency, they first say that technology doesn't exist. Well, okay, well here it is, it exists, and the state agency was like, here it is, it exists. They met with them, helped them find that it's real. One of the companies actually is in Arkin. They're the only ones that make the multi-metals monitor for continuous testing. And so after they couldn't argue that, they basically got the state to exempt them from the dioxin, furan, and PCB monitoring. And they say, well, we're going to just let you monitor the stuff you already monitor, the temperature and oxygen and carbon monoxide, and then do some calculations and come up with a number that is supposed to represent your dioxin emissions. Well, that would not tell you your actual levels of these most toxic chemicals known to science. You need to know other things that they can't test for, like how many chlorine atoms are in the waste stream and how much copper is a catalyst for dioxin formation is in the waste stream. They don't know that, and they can't know that. They need to test. But they didn't want to because they're scared. And they know, because they do this in their plant in Ontario, the only one in North America that continuously samples for dioxin, and they keep finding high levels. And they keep hiding most of that data because they're like, oh, that had some operational problem or some sampling error, so we're not going to give you that much data. They know there's a problem here, and they're afraid because this company runs over half the incinerators in the country. And they know that if this truth comes out in Oregon, that exposes their whole industry. So when I was visiting their plant yesterday, I thought I was just going to get a selfie or something. You know, Jim and I went over and we're just like, let's go drive by and take a picture. Well, we went to the parking lot, and as we're like trying to take a picture, this guy kind of slowly creeps toward us who's standing in the parking lot. I'm like, all right, yeah, he's going to come talk to us. So it's the maintenance manager talks to us, and he wouldn't answer the question why they're closing, but he did talk a little bit. But then the plant manager comes over, got his card and everything, and he was a lot more open. And so we're just chatting for like 10 minutes about a lot of aspects of it, and he admits that, yeah, there are 3 reasons why the plant is closing. And the third one he said was SB 488. That's the bill that I helped write. So they have admitted now. We know that that is a key reason why they closed. There are other reasons, like the largest source of their medical waste is going away. It's going to start burning in Nevada, where they built a new one. And unfortunately, it's the only new medical waste incinerator in probably decades in this country. And so that's part of it. And there's their cash cow. They got a lot of money taking medical waste instead of trash. But the fact that they shut down when they did, after threatening to sue the state over Senate Bill 488, is because after all the delays and the exemptions they got away with, they were supposed to start monitoring in the first quarter of 2025. And right after they announced that, they said, and we're closing on the last day of 2024. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Mike, for a great introduction to all the work that was done. And I'm proud we can be here in Oregon, that what we accomplished will set the trend, we hope, nationwide, and that what we've learned can also inform other communities. Because as Mike said, it starts with the stories of the communities, and then that becomes the impetus for changing laws. Great. So, as you will hear today, and as you may have heard, neighbors living near Coffin View have become increasingly alarmed about air and groundwater pollution from Coffin View landfill. And landfills are the second way to get rid of waste. And now, we're not doing incineration here in Oregon, so it's a primary way of putting waste out of sight, out of mind. So this group of concerned residents in the Benton County organized and became Valley Neighbors for Environmental Quality and Safety. I probably messed that up. Sorry. So Mark Yeager has been the key organizer for this community grassroots group, and I want Mark to tell us more about the connections between incineration and landfills, and describe the landfill and the harms it is causing and about latest efforts to expand the landfill. Thank you, Mark.
All right, thanks, Lisa. Oh, sorry. Thanks, Lisa. So unlike Mike, I wrote this question down and I wrote myself some notes because I know otherwise I am so enmeshed in this whole fight about the landfill that I'd be off. So I have to keep myself on track. And so first, to talk about the connections between incinerators and the landfill, we're talking about trash and ash. And so in the case of the Covanta landfill, the Covanta burner, so ash is a byproduct of incineration. After they do all their burning, at the bottom, they come out with this nice stuff. This Covanta burner burns municipal trash from Marion County and medical waste from all over. Well, the incinerator reduced flow of trash from Marion County to Coffin Butte. The toxic ash that is generated by the incinerator is being used as daily cover material at the landfill. So the dump operators are required to cover the working face of the landfill with material every day. It's supposed to be 6 inches of soil. But DEQ, so when Mike's telling his stories about how the regulators aren't really doing their work and protecting us and those sorts of things, DEQ has allowed this dump to use the toxic ash from the incinerator as daily cover material. And when they put that on the surface, the ash will cause airborne particulate matter, dust, that contains many contaminants. And once it's buried, it becomes part of the leachate that's generated by the decaying of the trash inside the landfill. And so it adds toxic material to that liquid leachate. So the municipal waste that's currently going to the incinerator will likely be diverted to the Coffin Butte landfill. And I am happy to celebrate the closure of the incinerator, but I have to say I'm quite concerned about the impacts to the landfill and to the residents and the region with the growing of this Coffin Butte landfill. It's estimated to be 100,000 tons of trash from Marion County that will now be diverted to the Coffin Butte landfill. And although the landfill is already at its limit, so there's an annual tonnage limit that Benton County put into the franchise agreement that allows the landfill to operate in Benton County, and Republic Services, the owner of the landfill, has agreed to that limit. It does not appear that Benton County is going to enforce the limit because the landfill is already at the limit of 1.1 million tons per year. So in a recent meeting with the Benton County Commissioners, they were asked, well, are you going to enforce this limit and cause us to think about doing something different here? And of course, they didn't answer that question. So Lisa also asked to talk a little bit about landfills and the harms of landfills. So the bottom line is safe landfills are a fairy tale. Greenhouse gases are emitted in dramatic quantities from landfills, and in particular, at Coffin Butte landfill, they have been caught violating Oregon and federal standards for release of methane. They do self-monitoring, so this is one of the other things that Mike was just talking about with the 1 time a year checking things. Well, they have to do their own self-monitoring, and they purposely walk around the landfill and avoid places where there's lots of methane coming out. They know where it's happening. They also spew dust, and recently there's been a study that identified that the forever chemicals, PFAS, are also now coming airborne out of landfills. And there's many other noxious gases. The folks who live within a 5 or 10 mile radius of the landfill can tell you every day when the landfill is spewing odors because it is dramatic. Also, the millions of gallons of toxic liquid leachate are currently being dumped into surface water. So they truck this material to wastewater treatment plants, like Salem's wastewater treatment plant or Corvallis's wastewater treatment plant, and it runs through the plant, but it gets very little treatment, and it's essentially passed through and discharged into the Willamette River, or it's leaking out of the bottom of the liners, or in part of the Coffin Butte landfill, there are no liners, and it's making its way into the groundwater. So once it's in the landfill, nothing goes away, and we are allowing a private company to create a permanent hazardous waste site that will ultimately become the public's long-term liability to clean up. So there are many other impacts associated with landfills. You know them. I noticed today as I was driving up from Corvallis, they must be getting ready to have their public hearings on this latest expansion because somebody had gone around and picked up the litter. There were bags of litter picked up along Highway 99. But there's litter, there's truck traffic, there's road damage. There's a lot of wildlife around this particular landfill. It also limits property use, the people who live in the vicinity of the landfill. It decreases property values. And there's recreational impacts for people who want to hike in McDonald Forest or to fish in the Willamette River. There are some specific histories with this landfill on a couple of different properties. So there is a local residential property that back in the 90s, their well became contaminated. And they were eventually, well, first they got a treatment system from the landfill operators that didn't work, and eventually the landfill bought them out, and that home site is now abandoned. And the DEQ solution to this problem, they advised a landfill owner to buy up more property around the landfill to create a buffer. It's not, let's solve the problem, there must be something going on here. It's, well, maybe we should just make yourselves a little bit bigger buffer. And there was also a story last year, and many of you might know of the Emerson Vineyards that is on Airlie Road. They're a few miles north of the landfill. They were prepared to sell their property to another buyer who was going to take over the winery. Well, the day they came out, the new owners came out to sign the paperwork, the smell was so bad from the landfill that the deal got canceled. So there are lots of different impacts. So this landfill's been here since the 1940s. It originally served just a very small area, but the volumes have gradually increased over time, and the annual volumes increased dramatically in 2017 when the River Bend landfill in McMinnville closed. And so for a one-year period, the landfill operator told the county, we're going to take some more waste just for 1 year. So in that year, there was about 500,000 tons of waste in 2016. The next year, it was about 850,000, and now it's up to 1.1 million tons of waste per year. Coffin Butte landfill currently receives nearly 1/3 of all the garbage generated in the entire state of Oregon. Landfills are temporary storage. They're not permanent. There's nothing happening here. It's not being disposed. There's a hole in the ground that stuff gets put into and sits there until the landfill operator decides that they're not going to make any more money. It's a huge profit center for private operators. Republic Services is a $15 billion a year revenue company. They make $1.5 billion a year in profits. Landfills are their most profitable business. They don't have any interest in recycling because that costs them money. It doesn't make them money. So we're going to be here with a current and future public health hazard that's going to have to be cleaned up and paid for by the public. So Coffin Butte landfill is again applying to expand the landfill area. They applied once in 1994, it was denied. They applied again in 2021, and it was denied. And now they're back with a modified proposal that is this is the camel with the nose under the tent, because they took their original proposal in 2021 and they've scaled it way back, but it actually is just the first phase of what they wanted to do in 2021. They basically want to fill the entire valley with garbage. So the only requirement for this is local land use approval by the Benton County Commissioners. DEQ is prepared to authorize the expansion if Benton County says okay. DEQ recently issued a draft air quality permit for the landfill that dramatically increases the amount of air pollution from this industrial facility. So our county commissioners, who are basically saying we don't have any role in environmental management of the landfill, we have to rely on EPA and DEQ, they're not doing the job. So thanks very much, and there'll be opportunity for questions. Sorry if that was too long.
No, Mark, thank you very much. There's a lot to learn about the situation there. But going forward on the topic of where do we go from here? I want to ask Miriam, Gorden, our guest from Storage Staff, to give us a quick zero waste 101 to help us understand what cities and individuals can do to reduce waste before it gets to an incinerator or a landfill. Let's make sure you speak really into it.
Can you hear me? Okay, great. So what we're hearing about is the nightmare of the failure of government to properly regulate industry. We have multiple problems going on here. Toxic chemicals in the products that are entering either the incinerator or the landfill are poorly regulated. I mean, we have over 100,000 chemicals being used in the products that we use in our everyday lives. For food packaging, for example, there are some 14,000 chemicals used in food packaging and food contact materials. Only 25% of them have ever been tested for safety for human exposure. And there is absolutely no transparency from the industry required of the industry as to what chemicals are going into that food packaging. So we have no way of knowing, and there's almost no way of preventing their use. We just have a broken regulatory system. So we have all of these chemicals in the products that are formerly entering the incinerator, now about to enter the landfill. Then they leach out. They ended up in the ash. They ended up in our air, but then they also end up in the leachate that is getting pumped out of the landfill, that goes into our wastewater system that has minimal treatment and doesn't remove those toxic chemicals, and then pollutes our watershed. So they get into the air, they get into the water. We are living in a polluted world. And we have a problem with waste, which was never addressed by the incinerator and is not addressed by landfills, which is that we are increasingly living in a world where products are disposable. Products are single use and used once and then have to be managed. And our waste management system for the last 50 years has been focused on, we talk about the 3 R's, right? Reduce, reuse, recycle. But really, the waste management system has been focused on recycling at best, if anything. Most of it's just disposal. So we have nothing built into our regulatory system that ensures that we're reducing the quantity of waste that's being generated that then needs to be managed, either recycled or composted at best, or ending up in incineration or landfill. So for, And why do we have this system? Why do we have this system where we have an ever increasing quantity of products that become waste over time? Just for example, for Oregon, right now, well, in 1992, the quantity of waste generated per capita, per person, per day was 6 pounds, 6 pounds of waste per person per day. And now it's over 7 pounds as of 2022, over 7 pounds of waste generated per person per day. Imagine that. In a period of time where the waste stream was becoming lightweighted as plastics became the, increasingly most popular paper, and then plastics became the most popular sort of packaging and product material of choice. So while we were lightweighting, we were still having an increase in the overall weight. So we're drowning in waste. And what do we do with it? For the last 50 years, we have, rather than saying we need to have products that are more durable, that are designed to be used many, many times over and over again, as they were before we had this single-use system, before we had single-use aluminum, before we had single-use paper, before we had single-use plastics. We've been focusing on what do we do with all this waste once it's generated. And the federal government, once again, failed to regulate in this space. So in the 1970s, there was a waste management law, the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, which mostly focuses on the regulation of hazardous waste. But when it comes down to what we call solid waste or municipal solid waste, which is what we're talking about here, it was left up to the states. And in the best of states, there have been efforts to recycle and to compost or take the organics out and compost it. But still, this is a waste management system. It's not focusing on preventing the waste once it's generated. Oh my God. Oh, almost at the end of my time. So just want to say we're in Oregon about to embark on more of the same. So I don't know how many of you have heard about the Plastic Pollution and Recycling Modernization Act that was passed in 2021. So it's going into effect. I see heads nodding, so many of you have. But what this is a recycling, what it says, it's a Recycling Modernization Act. It focuses on one set of performance measures for producers and for local government, which is to achieve a 50% recycling rate by 2040. And I think it gets up to 70% by 2050. So it focuses on improving the recycling system, which is good. It's good to improve our recycling system. It's going to expand recycling to rural areas. It's going to help fund local government to continue operating the recycling system. But there's nothing built into that law that drives and that has any performance requirement for producers to make products that are more durable, that are going to result in less waste. There's nothing in there that sets targets for waste reduction or reuse, nothing that ensures that the quantity of waste generated per capita decreases, nothing that gets producers to decrease single use and disposability, except there is some fee structure coming that would that focuses on life cycle impacts that may make it more expensive for producers will pay higher fees most likely for products that have greater environmental impacts, and so that may drive towards more durable products. Remains to be seen. It will be very, very different for different products. And so I just want to say to you as a community, as you're looking to what to do about all of this waste that's suddenly going to be going to the landfill, is that we need to focus on having less of it in the first place. And one way to get there is to ensure that the products that companies are making and that other companies are using are less disposable, are more durable, because they are going to be less toxic. When you think about it, there's less toxics going into ceramics and stainless steel and glass. Plastics, not so much, but it's still better to have a reusable plastic that's used 5, 10, or 50 times as opposed to 5, 10, or 50 single-use disposable plastics. Better from it helps get us off the whole addiction to the fossil fuel production system. We need to be, from a climate perspective for plastics, we need to be using less of it. So reusable plastics also have a role. So what we're working on at the Story of Stuff, and one of the things that we've been doing, that I've been doing for many years, not just at the Story of Stuff, is promoting reuse for food service and for the beverage industry and for consumer goods. And what could you do locally? I'm way over time. So I'm just going to say, and maybe we can get into it more. There are over 50 local policies already enacted that require reuse in food service. They say that restaurants have to use only reusables for on-site dining, and they have to start bringing reuse into the takeout food service model. Venues and large stadiums and large events have to use reusable cups. Schools have to start bringing back reuse so that children aren't eating off of disposable plastics and meals heated up in disposable plastics. Yuck. And that we need to bring back, that we need to have for consumer goods, things like when you go to the grocery store, you have an opportunity to get your products without the packaging. You could bring a reusable jar or container or borrow one, and you get to get those products from a bulk fill station, which would very much help to unpackage. And then for non-food service, for consumer goods, lots of communities are doing things like repair clinics, tool sharing, household goods swaps and exchanges. And we need to get the organics out of the waste stream and start collecting it and composting it. And these things can all be done through policies and ordinances at the local level. And how do we get there? I just have to really totally agree with Mike. Policy is the way that we're going to get there, because waiting for industry and producers and retail to do this voluntarily, we can wait forever. There's nothing that's going to change this disposability, this throw out and throw away culture on its own. We really need to push for it. So would be happy to talk more about how we've gotten these policies enacted all across the country, primarily in California, but it's expanding all across the country, but it takes local organizing and local effort. Thank you.
Now we're going to hear from Julianah, who's the lead person on the kinds of projects Miriam was just talking about for the city of Salem. And we want to hear from Julianah about how the Salem Climate Action Plan will speak to what we need to do next.
Thank you so much. So I really love how this panel was set up, because Miriam really put me in a good position here. So the Salem Climate Action Plan emphasizes reducing waste. There's an entire section dedicated to materials and waste. There are 6 actions talking about zero waste, and that is focused more on internal municipality operations. And we have that, strategically, because that's where the city has control. So when we're looking at the scope of what the city has strong control over versus what it can influence, we know that we have more control over what we personally do. And so beyond the municipal scope, there's also education opportunities. And I'm really excited for next year, 350 Salem's going to partner with the Climate Action Plan, and we're going to have workshop series to help support the self-efficacy of, acting in a zero waste frame of mind. And I heard something a while back that was really powerful, talking about how the system as being reduce, reuse, recycle is looking at the wrong side of it, because when we're talking about trash, it's honestly been a system of burn, bury, and born to see. And what we need to understand is that all of the consumerism and consumption that goes on in our lives, it has an impact at the end of life. And so if we're looking at creating a system that supports zero waste, we need to have a system that creates less waste, because it's a lot easier to get those incremental pieces down than to look at our 7 pounds per person per day and try and figure out how to divert all of that. And so, really excited to be working on this process, and the Solid Waste Advisory Committee is going to be taking up looking into waste reduction policies and what that could look like. Just going to verify with my notes real quick. We also see some of the other challenges in waste management regarding we are trying to find solutions that fit the bill, that are sustainable, that are cost effective, and that provide convenient solutions, because we know when we're talking about solid waste, if the solution isn't convenient, it's not used. So we're trying to look in what fits in that triangle. We're also really excited about the opportunities with the Recycling Modernization Act. That will provide tools for implementing policies around reducing packaging. But we also have issues with consumerism of durable goods, because as people are consuming more, there ends up being more garbage. And so we want to work on education around that. And then one of the big things that we're going to be focusing on is food waste reduction. Food waste is, according to Project Drawdown, one of the largest opportunities to reduce emissions. And when we're looking at that, it's not just composting. It's mostly source reduction, which I think provides a really impactful approach, because according to the NRDC's 2019, so in 2019 dollars, their evaluation, the average household of 4 would spend $1,500 a year on food that just went to the trash. And so right sizing the food that we're purchasing can help, because all of the resources and inputs that go into creating food are limited. And while we have a big issue of food waste, we also have a big issue of food insecurity. So if we make sure that the food that's being produced goes to filling hungry bellies, we can do a lot more good in our community. And then we are also looking at, so the CAP was written to reduce emissions, and solid waste in a sectors-based emissions inventory only takes up about 4%. So we do understand that there's not the bang for your buck that you might be looking for. And so it is a solution, but we do understand that like the capacity isn't there to meet the emissions reductions goal, but we certainly need drawdowns from every single sector. And then we also have public awareness issues. So when surveyed, people often say that their most impactful way of impacting climate action is by recycling, when we know, in fact, that recycling doesn't do that much in terms of emissions reduction. So understanding that the environmental movement started from recycling initiatives back in the 70s. It's an interesting way to say, yes, we do need recycling. Yes, we do need composting, but we need so much more. And so it is a holistic approach. And I think that the CAP does a good job at understanding that there are multitude of avenues to reduce emissions throughout the community. So I'm really excited to be working with our residents. So I'm so glad that you all came out here today, and I hope that we can all be a part of creating whatever our next steps are. I know that the landfill only has so much space, and so everything that we can do to reduce our waste helps improve or increase the lifespan of the landfill. And so certainly looking forward to working with you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Miriam. Okay, we're getting just about to the place where we have Q&A from the audience. I hope you're thinking of things. I just want to take one quick moment before we have short closing remarks. 1 minute. To let you know that there are going to be policies introduced in the state legislature in 2025 that will address many of the issues you've heard about today. Reducing organic waste, so reducing the waste of food from places like large cafeterias, school districts, jails, those kinds of places, and making sure they don't go to landfills. So we're not adding more things in landfills when we need to be reducing, so we don't have to keep expanding. There will also be a bill to do better methane monitoring at landfills, so that we, again, use science and technology to help us understand what is happening at landfills and how we can make sure that their gas systems and their leachate systems are working correctly. So we can give you more information about that afterwards, and I'd like to again maybe go in the same order if we can. Mike, Mark, and Miriam and Julianah, really quick, super, like, one thing you'd like the audience to take away.
I'm not prepared for this question. So there's a sign-up sheet on your way in. If you didn't get that, make sure you get that on your way out. I think there are check boxes for each group. So now that you've heard us talk, if you're like, I didn't check that, but I want to hear from that group now. You can go check that on your way out. So that's one thing. Also, incineration, we know, is worse than landfill, and as much, and this is not contest, we're on the same side here. But the thing is, incinerators make landfills worse, and I know I didn't get to do PowerPoint here and stuff, but I've got materials I can share. If anyone's not sure, we have proven that incinerators and ash going to a landfill is about 2 to 3 times more harmful for climate and health and environment in general than just going straight to that landfill. So that's why it is a big thing to celebrate that we got incineration out of the picture, because now the landfill is going to be less toxic, but more gassy unless we get the organic stuff out of there. So that's the next battle, is get that out, and then all the other toxic stuff, and how do we make landfills as least harmful as they can be, and do all the waste reduction so that they can be a lot smaller too.
Wonderful, that was perfect.
And I'm going to be short too. I'm going to say a couple of things. So we cannot continue to delude ourselves that landfilling is safe. We have to strengthen our land use and environmental laws and enforce them. Future generations are depending on us acting now.
Thank you, Mark. Miriam, what you got to say?
Don't make the mistake we made in California. All the local jurisdictions that I've been working with for years have been focusing on, okay, let's make our packaging and products more recyclable and more compostable. And it's been a quagmire. Most of the stuff isn't designed to be recycled when it's multi-material and hard to separate. your composters, your commercial composters don't want compostable foodware. It's full of contaminants, and it doesn't add any nutrient value to the compost. It makes the compost not usable for organic growers, so it's lower value, and they've already stated in Oregon, we don't want packaging waste in our compost. So don't go down that route. Focus on the upstream solutions, reduce and reuse, and support getting the food waste and the organics out as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. And last but never least, Julianah.
Thank you. I think that just ending on a note of hope. So unlike a lot of climate issues, waste is something that we all interact with every single day. And so you actually have the scope of control to impact how your waste is turning out. And it starts at where you purchase. And so you have a lot of control. And I think that in that control, there's a lot of hope and knowing that you can actually make a difference. I think that that's pretty empowering.
Thank you. Let's give our panelists a big round of applause. I know there's a lot of now we're going to hear from questions. Jim here has a mic, Kevin has a mic, and I see a hand in the back.
So who in the world is doing it right?
Probably no one, but from what I learned, we're getting there. Miriam, is that something you want to tackle, or Mike?
I'll take a stab at it. So Europe's way ahead of us on the toxics, on the reduce and reuse. Industry doesn't have as much influence. They have a lot of influence, but not nearly as much influence in the politics in the European Union as industry has here in our state capitals and federal government. So it's easier to pass more forward-thinking environmental policies there. But I'll just give you an example of what they recently did, just on packaging waste. The European Union this year passed packaging waste reduction law that requires, for example, the beverage industry to deliver 10% of beverages in reusable packaging by 2030 and 40% in reusable packaging by 2040. They've done similar things, have similar targets, and that's the thing. They set enforceable performance measures and targets. That's what you need in policy. Similar things for construction waste, for textiles, for all kinds of waste streams. There's only one exception: food packaging. McDonald's together with the paper packaging industry launched a huge lobbying campaign based on false science, bad data, and false information, and overwhelmed the European legislators with more lobbying than they'd ever seen on any issue ever before. And so they rolled back the requirements for reuse in food service, which would have said that whenever you sit down at a McDonald's or any other food service establishment, you have to be served with reusables. That's a law we've been passing all over California. And that for takeout packaging, they would have to have 10% reuse by 2030 and 40% reused by 2040, just like for the beverage industry. McDonald's and the paper industry single-handedly rolled that back. So that is, something that we have to be aware of, that well-funded industry players can overwhelm legislators with bad data and bad science. And we have to be at the table armed with the better data and the better science. And just citizen action, as Mike was saying, to demand these kinds of policies. So that's one example.
Anything to add?
I'll add a little bit. So a lot of examples of the upstream stuff, so I'm going to focus a little bit more on the back end of the zero waste hierarchy. But first say the best places in the U.S., generally everyone points to San Francisco. They claim they're 80% diversion. That's about 55% though in the residential sector. A lot of that's construction demolition waste they count to pump their numbers up. And California has some creative accounting in the whole diversion number system anyway. But they're still considered to be far wrong than most of the country in a lot of ways. So look to San Francisco for ideas, but most of the West Coast is way beyond where I'm from. You have curbside composting collection, which we're still doing pilots about and thinking about maybe doing in 10 years. But Halifax, Nova Scotia is an example I want to bring up. I have not yet visited that, and I want to, but I learned that years ago they had an incinerator proposal that people fought off and stopped. And the government was frustrated over this, and I think before that they even had a landfill that was off in the woods, and it was really stinky, and people complained about it even. And so they got that shut down, and the government threw up their hand like, well, what do you want us to do? And they actually genuinely asked that question of the people, unlike much of anything I've seen in the US. And they listened to the people when they designed a system. The people said, put the landfill here next to us and design it this way. And they have the upstream stuff, so they had a lot of diversion going on. And I don't have to hopefully explain too much about what that looks like, but happy to get into the weeds on pay-as-you-throw and all the other upstream solutions. But on the back end, they did two things that are pretty unusual. San Francisco dabbled in this a little bit and didn't tell anyone and then stopped. But Halifax did it. They have what's called a material recovery step. After all the source separation, stuff that's in the trash can, they pull out the extra recyclables that hit the wrong can, basically. So they get those out. And then the organic fraction, they compost that. It would be better to anaerobically digest that, but you basically want to get the stuff that breaks down and makes landfills gassy and stinky stabilized. So that's the biological stabilization step that you'll find in the zero waste hierarchy before you hit the landfill. You do those two steps, you're going to have a much smaller landfill that's not going to be toxic with all that ash. Of course, there's other toxic stuff in there. We're not going to pretend landfills are good. Mark's pretty clear, yeah, they're never good, but they can be less bad than they are now. And one way to make them less bad is make sure you don't put organic material in them without biologically stabilizing it first. That way it's broken down in a closed system like a digester where you can capture that gas that's mostly methane, but a lot of other stuff in there. You can capture it better than when you're trying to put all these wells in a landfill and hope you get it all, and it's open air and you just can't get it all. And that is one of the big problems with landfills, the leachate, the odors, the gassiness. That's all coming from the organics. And if we do these steps right on the back end, we'll have small landfills that are far more stable and not nearly as much of a nuisance like we currently experience.
Thank you, Mark. And person here, and then the next woman.
Lisa, is it cheating to ask 3 questions? One of each of 3 of them? Okay.
I'll stick around till after the end. You can ask me all the questions in the parking lot, so feel free to ask others.
Is that okay? Okay, great. Okay, Julianah, can Salem work things out with West Salem and other parts of Marion County to not send stuff to Coffin Butte? Can you start your own bloody thing?
So I think I'm in like the weird spot where there's like an echo. Just to verify I heard you. Are you asking if we can start our own landfill? So that one I don't have the information for. I know that Marion County is our waste shed, so I think that it would have to be through Marion County or something like that. So I can get you in contact with the right people.
Okay, so we'll learn more about that later. Jim, going over to this person.
Hello, this question's for Mike. You were starting to enumerate some, you were starting to enumerate some things, steps that we should do, including the continuous monitoring for more of the chemicals, and then that segued into other subjects. Can you go back to some of the other things that you would suggest that we do to make headway without lawyers? Because that's expensive. and yeah, make some progress as the
To
people.
better answer your question, I need to know the rest of it. To do what? What are you trying to do?
Well, we're trying to stop the expansion of the landfill and stop the toxic input into the environment from the leachate and the air. So, yes, anything along that line and continuing on the continuous monitoring.
The real answer is we should have a strategy session separate from this so we can talk about all the things that shouldn't be on a video on YouTube. But in general, people-powered approaches, local government as much as possible. As I said with the bad news, some of the stuff that I found other states are capable of, you're not allowed to in Oregon. But there probably are other parts I haven't found. Sometimes I'll find, sometimes the state says you definitely can't regulate solid waste at a local level or air at a local level. I think you're one of those in the state. I have to look it up on my map and see. But some levels are more silent, and there might be some general language in the state code that talks about the general powers of municipalities. And sometimes there's stuff in there that isn't in the air code or the waste code, so I might not have found it without diving into Oregon state law yet. So we can do that together and put creative thinking hats on, because even if it's something like your school board taxing them in some way, maybe you have a taxation authority, there are always creative ways to figure out, and you just have to have enough of those creative ideas, and I can bring a lot to the table just because I've seen a lot of different creative things around the country. I can be like, oh, they did this interesting thing over here in Massachusetts, maybe that'll work. So we can think of that together, but basically focus most on what the most local level government can do, and if it's not a municipal level, then the county level, maybe you don't have a municipality there, it works different in each state. But figure out what they can do so they can't just pass the buck and say it's all DEQ and all you're doing is fighting the state. Because if that's the game you're playing, it's much more set up for you to lose.
Great. Any other questions? Let's go back to that side.
Hi, thank you. This might be more for Mike, but others can answer. I'm closer. Oh, there we go. I'm concerned with biosolids. There have been recent newspaper reports in Texas, Michigan, and New York where animals have died and meat products have been banned from sale, and organic farmers have been ruined because they've been putting biosolids on their lands, but they were not tested for PFAS, and the PFAS have killed the cows. Maine has banned biosolids, which are sewage sludge, dried sewage sludge is what it is. And I think it's probably a problem even if you don't put the leachate in the sewage systems. But I don't think they're testing in Oregon the biosolids for leachate. What happened in Maine, and where did the biosolids go? And who's testing for PFAS in the biosolids that they're selling to farmers?
So, does anyone else want to? Yeah.
I have a little, you go first, and if I can
And then Lisa too. Lisa, if you have some information there.
Do you want to start?
I just want to say that Representative Ken Hill has tried twice to introduce a bill that would test biosolids that are being applied to agricultural land for PFAS. The bill has failed twice. I am trying to find out if he's going to introduce it again. But you are correct. This is a major problem that could poison our food systems, and we have to get a handle on what is in biosolids, and probably the same is true for the leachate that's leaving landfills and going into our municipal wastewater systems. It's full of PFAS and other very bad chemicals, and we're not really able to treat that in our municipal wastewater system, so it goes right into the rivers that provide our drinking water. So again, this whole system is broken. Anything else?
So I'm going to start with a comment about Rush Limbaugh. I was never a fan of his, but he once said, words mean things. And that's the one thing I can agree with him on. Words do mean things, and when we have PR terms like waste to energy, which is not even scientifically accurate, it's an incinerator, we don't magically turn waste into energy. The same thing with biosolids. That is a term that came up by the public relations industry doing a contest to see how to rename sewage sludge so it doesn't sound bad. And they had all kinds of suggestions, and that was the one that came out back and win. And now you have state regulators that correct us. If you call it sewage sludge, like, no, you mean biosolids. No, I mean sewage sludge. Stop playing games. Like, so please don't help them in their public relations battle. They don't need your help. They have enough. So call it sewage sludge over and over again until they get sick of you saying it. So anyway, we're toxic sludge. There's a good book called Toxic Sludge is Good for You. The subtitle is Lies, Damn Lies in the Public Relations Industry. They let me put the chapter on sewage sludge online, so you can find it on our website if you want. I can show you later if you come up to me. But the reasons why we've been, and I've been working with folks since the early mid-90s against sewage sludge, is well before we knew that PFAS was a problem. So I'm glad that that's bringing new awareness to this issue, but there are people dying, cows dying, farms being poisoned, going back decades now, because they've been dumping sewage sludge on farm fields. Whether there's landfill leachate going into that sewage treatment plant or not, there are all kinds of toxic chemicals that go down the drain, radioactive stuff that goes down the drain. There are infectious diseases in that, pharmaceutical residues, all kinds of stuff. Everything in our industrial society basically is going to end up down the drain at some point, and it's all in that sewage sludge. So that's one of the only things I think does belong in our landfill. We need to digest it first and stabilize it as much as we can so it's not worse in our landfill. But it's one of the only things that really does belong there, because we don't have a way of having clean sewage sludge. And I don't care what anyone tells me, how little industry you have, there's still too much stuff. If you look in this grocery store, the aisle that you can smell the chemicals in, because even though they're closed, you can still smell it. And read the labels on the back of the shampoo, and you see like methylchloroisothiazolidine and other things you can't even pronounce. You know, like that, every week that those store shelves are being replaced and cleared out, all that stuff is going down the drain. All those chemicals. So all this ends up in the sewage sludge. It will never be clean or safe. We need to ultimately detoxify our whole society for this problem to be solved. There are ways to reduce sludge volumes. There are ways to reduce the toxicity, but it's never going to be appropriate to put on farm fields. Maine was the first one to ban it, thank goodness, and it's because of PFAS concerns. Connecticut recently became the second state to do so, and hopefully more will follow. I'm not sure if I answered all of your questions, but feel free to talk later with me.
Okay, we have a question down in front. Thank you for that question.
This is for Mike. I was wondering if you were aware of an excellent alternative to cremation. Have you heard about human composting?
I'm smiling. Yeah. I'm actually working on a crematory battle right now. Crematories are like incinerators for solid waste, but just for human bodies. So in the same way, I sometimes talk about it and I refer to cemeteries as landfills by accident. But yeah, crazy. But I mean, our bodies should go back to the earth. We should be composted. And for some reason, probably just because they have the word green in front of green burial, they feel they can charge people more for this. But there are green cemeteries now around the country. And you can basically just be composted. We don't need to be having all the fancy makeup and clothes and pump full of chemicals and put us in wood and cardboard and metal and steel boxes and things and put us underground and hope that we're preserved forever. I mean, that just is insanity. So, like, let's just compost people. They have some really creative ones where they'll, like, freeze you and then smash you into dust and then plant you under something, and then you can, like, pick what tree you become. You know, you could go that far if you want, but it's not necessary. It should be very cheap and available everywhere. We just need more green cemeteries that will just compost people and do it in a nice, fancy way so people feel like it's respectful, you know, like dress you up in something that'll break down.
Okay, well, let's go on. We have another question right here. Thank you for that question very much.
Thank you all. I think point of view is very important in any issue. And in the interest of that, one who sees a failure to regulate would also twist that and say that's just freedom. Freedom from oppression, freedom from regulation, freedom, free enterprise. That's the point of view someone else might say. So be aware of that, of course. And I think consumer action is very powerful. Why not more focus on the origin, or not necessarily forcing businesses to comply with what some would interpret as oppressive government regulation and restriction? Why not make the public pressure of, we don't want to buy this shit. We will refuse to buy what is in the marketplace unless it is in our interest. And I think emphasis on the power of the people to influence the market through their market pressure is very powerful, and I encourage more of that. Not that I oppose what you're doing, because I know that's targeting powerful stuff. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. This is important.
Yeah, I mean, I know I made a big pitch for policy, for regulation. Consumer pressure is a good driver. I would agree. But one of the challenges is that when we aren't being offered alternatives when we go to the store. So just think about in your lifetime how much the packaging that you see in the store has changed over time, from durable products to becoming more paperboard to increasingly becoming more plastic. And just like babies now are being fed out of plastic sachets, with little squeeze sachets, and everything is being plasticized. And we know that plastics are toxic and that they shed microplastics and nanoplastics, and that those plastics are getting into the air we breathe, they're getting into the water and food and beverage products that we consume, and that they migrate into our bodies. They cross the blood-brain barrier. They're lodging in our brains or lodging in our major organs. They cross the placenta. Fetuses are being shown to be being born pre-plasticized, having microplastics in their bodies, or nanoplastics and microplastics. So we don't have a lot of choices, but we can support the businesses that are providing us with alternatives, like, your local fillery or a grocery store that has a bulk distribution, a bulk bin aisle where you can bring your own thing. And one other thing that I've been wanting to say is that as a result of the Recycling Modernization Act, there's going to be a huge amount of funding coming from different sources in that act for waste prevention and reuse, and local communities will be able to access some of that funding to help lift up new business models that do give us as consumers the power of choice and the opportunity to consume products in a different way. For example, like you have a company in the area called Bold Reuse that has been expanding the use of reusable containers for takeout. And if we could have more of those sorts of things, and reusable cup programs, and on and on. So yes, I agree with consumer choice, but we need to have those options available. And sometimes it's local action that will obtain the funding that will make those options available.
Yeah, thanks for your comment. I appreciate that. The one thing that doesn't come up often enough, in my view, is that we are not paying the true cost of what we're doing. So consumer choice is part of the deal, but the cost to dispose of your garbage needs to reflect the real long-term costs. And that's not happening now. I mean, in Senator Patterson's statement, she is focused on cost as well because she has constituents. But the cheapness of throwing it into the dump is what's driving a lot of consumer choice.
My question is about the recycling of plastics and how they're melted down, and if that process pollutes the air or things like that.
Thank you for that question. I'll just kick it off by saying melting plastics is really incinerating plastics. And so hand it over to Mike or Julianah. Is he going to talk about this?
So each type of plastic, you might have seen the chasing arrows with the different numbers coded inside. Each type of plastic gets recycled differently, and a lot of them do involve some type of pyrolysis or any type of changing that form down to plastic nurdles. If you're looking at some things like styrofoam, that's often turned into this Laffy Taffy goo when it's heated. And so it really depends on the specific type of plastic, on how it gets recycled. All of them require both mechanical and chemical processes. And so there is that in all of that. And just one other point on recycling plastics is they all have extra plasticizers. So even if it's a number 1 plastic or PET, it's going to have other chemicals in it. And those other chemicals serve their properties, but they also make it more difficult to have high quality recycled plastics, which is one of the reasons why we want to move away from plastics in general. They aren't a good system to be invested in.
Build on that a little bit, but Miriam on this. But I mean, the first step, of course, is avoid plastic at all costs anywhere you can. You know, as a bottom line. But if you have no choices, and you're like, okay, this plastic or this plastic. Number 3, which is PVC, vinyl. It's your Barbie dolls. It's your vinyl siding. It's your Romex wire that's providing electricity through your house. That is the most toxic plastic to make or to dispose of. It has chlorine in it. A lot of it is chlorine. And that makes it extremely toxic to make or when it's incinerated or even when it's landfilled. Especially if you have a house fire, a lot of that is becoming dioxin when you burn it. That is how you make dioxin, is that kind of stuff burning. So avoid that one like the plague. But number 6, which is your styrofoam or polystyrene, also very toxic. Number 7, which is a mixture of other plastics, polycarbonate, avoid that. And the compostable ones, avoid those a lot as well, because Mother Jones did an analysis. They looked at which ones leach hormones like chemicals that mess with your hormones. And it was the compostable plastics that were the second worst in that of all the plastics. 91% of the samples came back leaching stuff that messes with your hormones, and we're feeding people on this and having them with utensils, putting it in their mouth. That's not safe at all. So if you have to weed out the worst of the plastics, weed out those. It's the 1s, 2s, and sometimes 5s that are recyclable. They also happen to be the less toxic of those. So pick those if you have to, but if you can avoid them at all, nothing.
Yeah, I think Mike just gave a really good list of plastics that should be banned because they're so toxic, although all plastics have chemical additives that are of concern. But as to the question about recycling plastic and is it safe, everyone's arguing over what is what kinds of processes can be considered recycling. And I think I believe that you would agree with me, Mike, that any process that chemically treats or breaks down the plastic polymers, or any solvent-based or solvolysis system that breaks down plastic polymers and then the polymers have to be recreated, is very polluting and shouldn't be considered recycling. And I believe I read, and somebody should correct me if I'm wrong, that the Recycling Modernization Act defines recycling as only as mechanical recycling, which is basically grinding the plastic down into flake or into resin powders and then reusing them in a process, what we would think of as a more traditional recycling process. Not that is pollution free, but it's probably less bad than pyrolysis, gasification, solvolysis, these chemical or heat treatments that break down the polymers. You agree with that?
Well, we've come to, one more. Begging for one more. I want to say that the panelists will be around afterwards, so we can meet you out in the hallway. And go ahead.
I just wondered if anyone on the panel is aware of ReWorld that collects plastic. Is that a good solution? Is it coming? Is there a chance it will come to Salem?
Thank you for that question. I think that ReWorld has some redundancies of programs that are already offered. For your plastic film, those can already be dropped off at like grocery stores and things like that, and they often have the same end markets, but that way you can not spend that extra money in that system. So I would suggest looking for the other outlets that are already available. Thank you.
We can continue this great conversation after